received a law degree from the University of Utah and a master's in taxation from the University of Washington. After practicing law for a short time, he took a job with the Boyer Company in Utah at the beginning of the Business Depot Ogden project, which some of you may know. As project manager, he helped bring in $500 million in private investment into BDO, and Ogden negotiated $250 million in lease transactions and helped create over 4,000 new jobs. He served 2 terms in the Utah House of Representatives and co-founded the social benefit real estate fund, Rocky Mountain Homes Fund, where he worked for several years. He is currently serving as the governor's senior advisor for housing strategy and innovation, a role he assumed in December of 2023. So he's been in this role for a super long time, as you can tell. In addition, he serves on the board of the United Way Northern Utah, the Utah Commission of Housing Affordability, and the board of the Utah Housing Corporation. Without further ado, Steve Waldrip.
Thank you. Don't clap until after, because then you'll know whether or not you should be. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today to everybody. These groups are my most, this is where I feel the most kinship, I guess. One of my good friends, Andrew Gruber, who kind of walked me into this world of planning when I was in the legislature, is not here today and texted me, and I won't forgive him for not showing up. But I have other friends here, people I've worked with through the years in talking about the big picture. And what you guys do is you take that big picture, these concepts, and you have to turn them into reality. I've worked with Charlie Ewart for a number of years. I was on the planning commission of Ogden Valley Planning Commission, and I've watched Charlie do that, and I've watched many of you do the same things in other places where you take sort of these concepts and you have to refine them down into something usable. You have to create tangible things out of thin air, and there's an immense amount of just a fascinating ability for me to follow that process as I watch your brains work and watch you take these concepts and put them onto paper and put them onto something that you can actually turn into actionable items. I just think it's fascinating, and so I love watching that process. I'm terrible at what you guys do, just so you know. I'm very much more focused on the big moving blocks of things than I am on getting it into the nitty gritty. And so, and maybe that's why I like you so much, because I need help to turn it from something that's a concept into something that can be real. And so I really just appreciate the people in this group for that reason. So we live in a really, really scary time, right? Who's kind of worried about the next presidential election? And you don't have to say why. Anybody not worried about the next presidential election? I want to see a brave soul raise their hand. All right, nobody. We live in kind of uncertain times, right? There's a lot of uncertainty. This is not new. I mean, think back, we have, in the 1970s, what did we deal with? We had the Vietnam War, we had Watergate, we had OPEC, coming into being, and all of a sudden we had gas lines. I remember when I was a little kid, the gas lines in Southern California where I grew up. Uncertainty and uncertain times are not new to the United States. You go back in history and you can find these blocks of time where it seems like there's an inflection point. And where things are like, hey, we're either gonna survive or we're gonna die, and we survive. And the reason we survive is because our structures are the best that can be created with the frailties of man and what we're having to deal with. But the concepts that turn into the structures are what allow us to survive. And so what we'll talk about today will kind of relate to both sides of that. We'll talk about concepts, we'll also talk about specific structures. But what I would propose is that the structures that you create out of these concepts are what allow our country to continue moving forward. It's what allows us to be who we are. If you think about other places, there are a lot of places that talk highfalutin talk, right? Anybody ever listen to Vladimir Putin talk? I mean, he says amazing things, right? If you just listen to him, you would think, hey, that's a good guy. He knows what's going on. He's got it figured out. Now, in practice, it's a little bit different. He likes to, poison people. I'm probably next on the list now, so I got to check my water. Like if you shake my hand and I die the next day, I'll know who it was. Yeah, or I won't be flying anywhere anytime soon in a private jet. I may just fall out of the sky. But that's the difference, right? You have, think about, I think about Venezuela all the time. My dad grew up there for a number of years in his youth. And I think about Maduro and before him Chavez and what they said. And if you listen to them talk, you would just be like, oh, these guys know how to make things happen. They say the right things. We're helping people. We're doing all of this good. We're responsible. We're going to save the world. But what doesn't happen in those countries is what happens in the United States, and particularly in Utah. We take those concepts and we create structures and programs that actually follow the concepts, that are faithful to the concepts that start with a constitution and go all the way down to our local ordinances. And so that's what we do that's different, I think. And that's what you guys do, and that's why you're so critical to what we're going to talk about today, which is, affordable future, the future of affordable housing in Utah. So let me ask one more question. Who here is willing to admit that they have an adult-aged child living at home with them? A few. Who knows an adult-aged child living with in a basement or some other kind of sub-rental? Okay, yeah, that's more accurate, probably more honest too. That's just the reality right now. That's become our new normal. And that's happened just in the course of a very few years. As housing prices have increased, we had a situation where, over time, wages and housing prices kind of ran in parallel, right? You had multiples that would apply to the market, and they would go up in tandem. And then we had this 2009 bubble, and supply dropped, and all of a sudden now we have this demand that outstripped our supply so far that prices for housing ran like this relative to wages. And for a period of time, we had that covered because we had basically free money. You go out and borrow money at 2%, you go borrow money at 3%. And I'm not sure it slides in here, but Utah actually has the highest percentage in the country of people with below 4% home loans. That means we're super smart, really. I mean, that is like a testament to our brilliance and our population's desire to do the right thing. However, who's going to move out of a 3.5% mortgage to buy something more expensive with a higher interest rate? You've just kind of created this artificial barrier in the market by doing the right thing. And so that's part of what we need to talk about is, are the markets working properly, and are there things that we can do as government that can modify what's happening in the markets and modify what's happening in the world in an appropriate way that we respect, and I'll put it in large air quotes, the free market of housing, right? Who thinks for the market in housing? Real estate is a free market. I mean, that's such a misnomer, right? It's the most regulated thing, I think. I've had arguments with medical people, but I think it's the most regulated thing that we do in our country because it's governed from the highest level at the national level, all the way down through every level of government, down to the HOA and the Karens, right? We have, I mean, Karen is like the most basic governmental agency, right? We've now created this new governmental agency, and you call it the Karens. And so it's tremendously regulated. So with that backdrop and acknowledging that there's still a question as to whether Princess Kate is actually alive or dead, and I don't know the answer to that today, but I'm working on it. Let's talk a little bit about the legislative session. And as I'm talking, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt, and we'll either take that question then or we'll postpone it to the end. But just make sure that you feel like this is a small enough group, we can talk, right? So with that, hit the right button. So this is like, what a great headline. You know, I am Chicken Little. I am the official governor's Chicken Little. And I've been saying, before I was hired, and I think this is why he hired me, because he knew I was already talking about the fact that the sky is falling. We have a looming crisis, and I've already referenced Venezuela. Fast forward 50, 60 years from now, and we have 2 generations where they can't get into home ownership. What does that look like? Now, we know we don't have pensions anymore, by and large. We rely on our own kind of 401k savings. Social Security may or may not be around. I wouldn't bet on it in the same form it is now. So what happens when that generation reaches the end of its productive working years?
They're broke.
They're broke. They don't have sufficient resources to fall back on. So what do? Who do they look to? Uncle Sam and Aunt B. I'm trying to get Aunt B to catch on, because that's like the nickname for Utah that I really want to have people talk about. But Aunt Beehive. That's who is going to be looked to provide for their basic needs. And we see what happens. You start electing people that promise the most free stuff. And at some point, free stuff doesn't just materialize out of thin air, right? We are providing the free stuff. And there's an appropriate role for that, right? I mean, we care for the most needy among us. We care for those who can't care for themselves. But when you have an entire segment of society or an entire generation that can't care for themselves because they haven't been given the opportunity, because the dream is out of reach for them, we have a Venezuela problem, where you're going to have a huge group of people that are largely disenfranchised. And when people are disenfranchised, they got nothing to lose. And when they got nothing to lose, they'll do crazy things, like vote for people who promise them things that are totally unrealistic. And, you know, again, I love Venezuela as a perfect example. All of a sudden they have this natural resource rich country. They start nationalizing all their industries. And that brings a bunch of money into the government's coffers. That's a one-time shot, because they run them into the ground, because they've distributed all the money for free and the cronies get it all, and it doesn't end up working out. So that's why this scares me to death. That's why the headline of me being scared to death and the shame that comes along with the whole world knowing I'm scared. So this is what I've referred to as the Bible during the last legislative session. Again, I've been in this role for 3 months. But when I saw this is what drove my process through this last legislative session over the last few months, and is guiding kind of where I think we need to go. This is the housing starts for Utah. So you can see in the middle there, we have a big drop following the recession. That created our housing deficit that we're still dealing with now. We climb up the mountain. We're climbing. We're at 37,000 starts in 2021, and we're like getting out of the hole. We're finally catching up. And then interest rates go up. And then we have 3 bank failures last year. And then the Fed tightens up on credit on the banks. So the banks can no longer lend out the way they used to usually lend out. They start, they are they're restricted to 1-to-1, which is the safest thing you can do. If you have $1 in your pocket, you can lend out $1. But they're used to lending out $2 or $3 for every dollar in their pocket because that's generally considered safe. But because of this constriction of the money supply, all of a sudden the 60% of our real estate developers that are not national, they don't have their own funding, they have to go to their community banks, there are community builders, no longer have access to capital. So they're riding the wave right now of this, starts in 2021, the starts, and then at some point those starts tail off and you have a lot of people hungry and looking for work. So this is what scares me, is that we have a problem in our ability to maintain these small community builders, keep them working, which keeps their subs working, which keeps keeps you guys employed, keeps money flowing into our municipalities, keeps taxes. I mean, the economy is just a big flywheel. And if you cut that off, bad things happen. And that's what happened in the last recession. It was cut off by bad lending practices, and now we have kind of a different scenario where the economy is really healthy, but we're still not building what we need to build. You guys all know this. Utah is now, depending on what you look at, it's the 6th or 7th or 3rd. I think I just saw 3rd, number 3 in the last, depends on which measure you use. We're in the top. We are so good. We are the most expensive mid-sized, smallish state in the country. We used to be on the other side, right? We were like 47, 46, 45, we floated in the 40s, and then all of a sudden we shot to the top, where people anecdotally talked to a business owner who had people moving from just outside New Haven, Connecticut, that said, I sold my home in Connecticut and I came to Utah and I can get less house in Utah than I can from a suburb of New Haven, Connecticut, which is right outside New York, which is like the insurance capital of the world. These are really wealthy communities, and they're stepping down to come to Utah, which is a complete reversal of what we're used to. This is the chart that referenced earlier. All of a sudden the ratio of income to housing prices has shifted dramatically. We've doubled the amount of money you have to afford the median home. And again, there are people who say, why don't we just increase wages? Well, then you increase inflation, and again, you get into that death spiral cycle. So we can't just pay everybody more money because that doesn't work. So all this points to, hang on, I can go back and take a picture of that. All this points to the fact that we have a supply crisis. And I think the smart people that I talk to pretty much agree with this. And just so you know, none of what I say here none of this is my idea. Just to be clear, I synthesize ideas from a lot of different places, and none of this thought is original to me, really. A lot of the thoughts that I end up with come from you. And that's where the value is of these groups and the feedback that, that we get as policymakers or as policy drivers. This is what this is the slide. 71.9% of Utahns are interest rate of 4% or lower. Not of Utahns, but of mortgage holders in Utah. Highest in the country. We're super smart. So let's now talk about some of the legislative efforts that came out of this last thing. So again, starting with the premise that our biggest issue is supply. And again, does anybody, and I'm like dead serious, does anybody want to argue with that premise? I'd love to hear somebody articulate a differing opinion, because I haven't heard one that I've been able to really bite. Or you can come up and talk to me afterward if you don't want to talk about it here in front of everybody and have everybody mock you. Charlie. Charlie's not afraid to be mocked.
Yeah, not at all. I don't want to argue, just an observation. I have a hard time seeing a future in which we catch up to supply and housing costs come down. I mean, there's no political motivation for anyone to get to that scenario.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the legislature that made everyone's wealth diminish.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the fundamental difference between the 2008-2009 crash and what we're dealing with today. There's some pretty fundamental changes that have happened between then and now. This bubble or this rise in interest rates is not related to risky mortgages. It's it's related to low price mortgages. I mean, I guess those are risky in some nature, but those are trading out in the markets and they're just fine. There's not bad mortgages out there. There are actually really good mortgages out there right now. But prices have shot up, commodity prices, labor prices to a large degree, and there's no indication that any of that is going to reverse course.
It almost seems, the reason why I bring it up is it almost seems like we can curb the edge of the ever-increasing price, perhaps, and keep it in stasis until wages can catch up. But wages, to me, is the only solution. Either that or we're losing land wealth, those of us who got in before the prices went crazy.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right. And that's the point. That's the supply point, right? Is not that we're going to throw so much supply out there that we're going to create a supply glut and all of a sudden now demand drops and prices crash. I mean, that's really not, I don't think that's realistic, nor is it the goal. That we're going to catch up and create so much supply that we're going to go backwards. Yes. And share your name with me if you don't mind.
I'm Jay Hoffman. So I don't argue either that there's a supply problem. How is demand calculated? How is that forecasted? And I would say demand has probably changed a lot in the last few years, where everybody's like, hey, I could buy a second home and rent it out as an Airbnb and make a lot of money. So there's a whole new part of the demand curve that wasn't there before. Like, people may have had a rental property because mom and dad died and they inherited this house and I'm just going to rent it out. But nowadays it's everybody trying to get that side hustle with that second, third house, whatever. And then the other thing that I want to ask about is, we could say, yeah, once we reach this supply, we'll have enough housing in Utah, I guess. But do we have the resources, like the water, to ever get to where we would like to be as far as supply goes?
Okay, several good questions in there. First point is on the demand side. What happened during COVID? Airbnbs exploded. We already had corporate ownership happening in many of our communities where you had entire subdivisions being purchased by large corporate ownership. You had Bank of America, you have BlackRock, you have Goldman. I mean, you have a number of large investors that put a ton of money into real estate and changed the demand because they added a new component of demand to the structure, and then the conversion of primary homes into secondary homes. That's a huge shift. It used to be you had to be really, really wealthy to have a second home or to have an income property. Now it's kind of an upper middle class thing, and maybe even a true middle class thing in many circumstances, where people are riding their ability to get cheap money. That's one of the issues with cheap money, right? You can go out and borrow money cheaply, and so your cover, you don't need to rent that Airbnb out 5 nights a month to make your mortgage payment. And so it changed dramatically on the demand side. And frankly, and this is just my own opinion, we've been really stupid in how we have dealt with both overnight rental conversions of primary housing and the ability of institutional investors to come in and purchase primary residential housing. We've closed our eyes to it for a number of years, and we're now dealing with the fallout from that eye closing period. And and there are some people that have and will make incredible amounts of money on the residential real estate they've purchased. That is the amount of money that is not going into the middle class. And again, this is back to why I don't sleep at night, because the middle class, the equity appreciation that comes with property ownership is what has created what we have today in America. America. Just recently, the Federal Reserve came out with their this year's study of the net worth of homeowners versus renters. Anybody seen that? Okay, this is a fascinating statistic, and this will tell you, okay, we need to do better. The median net worth of a renter in the United States, $10,400, 10-4. The median net worth of a homeowner in the United States is $386,200. That is a wealth gap that is very, very scary to me. Because if all of our youth are going into that $10,000 category, you've now sacrificed massive amounts of upside. And to be clear, we are riding right now the wave of the post-World War II building boom. After World War II, what did we build? We built a whole lot of houses for our soldiers coming home. They came home, they got a GI Bill, they went to school, they got jobs. They were able to buy homes and own property in unprecedented numbers in our country. And what did we build? 1,000 square foot homes, carports, unfinished basements, small lots. That's what we built because that's what people could afford. And so that's part of the push now is we have to sort of shift our expectations. We've gone from that period in the 1950s and then every generation after well, I got to live better than my parents did. I got to have, the average home size went from 1,100 square feet and grew 2,800, 3,000. I mean, our homes got bigger because that's human nature, right? We always want to be progressing and growing and getting better. But we're to a point now where we have to shift back that expectation. And I think it's not only possible, but it's also healthy. And I also think that the demand for opportunity to purchase a first home at an affordable price is off the charts. We haven't served that component of our population. Yes.
So Charlie and I just had a conversation yesterday with some folks from Nielsen Homes, and they're talking about square footage prices of $300 per square foot. So even at the 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 square foot smaller home that you would see on a smaller lot, you're still looking at, and even townhomes are going for this, you're still looking at quite a bit of money, $300,000 or more, to get into an attainable, not even an affordable, an attainable home. That's another side of this supply side that we're seeing is a real constraint.
It's crazy that we're talking about starter homes at $300,000 plus.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a crazy number. My first home was $106,000. Now that was 24 years ago, 25 years ago. But that same home now would sell for $450,000. And so the fact that, when we talk about these neighborhoods and creating starter home units in neighborhoods, these are not, these are the regular working people. These are the people who have done everything right. I think that's probably the way to describe them. These are the people that have gone to school, they've graduated from high school, they've gone to trade school, they're a nurse, or they're a tech, or they're a firefighter, or they're a police officer, they're a teacher. They've checked all of the boxes on the path that was laid out for them as children as how do you attain the American dream? What am I supposed to do, mom and dad, teacher, leader? What do I do to get to where I want to be? Do I have what I should be able to achieve? And they're now at the point where they're saying, I checked all those boxes. And I'm sure there's some in this room that feel this way right now. I checked all of those boxes and now I have no opportunity for growth. The dream is being kind of taken away from me. The rug's being pulled out from under my feet. That's a dangerous thing. Again, back to why I don't sleep at night. Yes?
So one of the problems I see with the creation of new smaller starter homes is how do we actually allow that to occur or force it to occur? Because a lot of people say, oh, well, we got to get to smaller lots. Well, look at what's happening to our smaller lots in Saratoga Springs. We have 3-4-story tower homes going on 3,000 square feet of lot.
Selling for $700,000 or $800,000, 600,
So
700,
we're not
800.
creating anything starter there. We need to look at doing maximum floor size regulations.
That's a perfect point. So the solution, and this is what we'll talk about in the legislative piece of this, the solution is not just, and again, my developer friends, you know, if I brought them in here, they would all stand on top of you and pour your salads over your head and say, you guys are the worst, and you know, I can't get anything done with you darn city people and county people and planners and causing problems. And then I would go to their thing and I would tell them that, you know, every planning group and local official group would come and dump salad on their heads saying they're just greedy suckers and they don't care about people. And the honest truth is, and I think this is really true, if you were in their shoes and they were in your shoes, you would probably say the exact same thing. And that's just the reality of human nature, right? We know our world and we don't really understand other people's words. And so my job, as I see it again, is to sit between those two worlds. Because your world is real. The challenges that you face as local officials are real and significant. The challenges that developers face in trying to make payroll and, you know, do their part are real and significant. And so that the battle isn't between what sometimes happens, which is your world is so fake. You constructed this world that's forcing you into a pattern of action that's not real. That's not the discussion. The discussion is where do those two worlds overlap and where can we find solutions? So that's what we focused on in this last legislative session. So yes, go ahead.
Well, it's hard because it's like, where do you find a developer that says I only want to make this much percentage?
You
versus
don't.
They can make more, exactly. So it's hard because I feel like, you know, there's like PIDs, there's public infrastructure districts
Yeah.
that can be created, which they can bond for all their infrastructure, which is a massive cost to the developers. But are they going to actually pass
That savings along, right,
over
yeah.
to the end buyer?
Does the water get to the end of the row? Absolutely not. And this goes back to the Saratoga Springs discussion. I'm a builder. And I'm a responsible builder. I'm a good guy. I go to church on Sundays. I have a family. I pet dogs. I feed the birds in the park. I'm super, I'm a nice guy. Donate to charities. But I've got a lot. And on that lot, I can build something that's going to sell for $700,000 or $800,000 and I make $200,000. Or I can build thing B, which sells for $400,000 and I make $50,000. And the market's there for both of them. Because again, we are dealing with a deficit scenario in our economy right now. Who would build thing B? Nobody. You'd be stupid. People would question your sanity. Your employees would go, what is wrong with you? Because that's rational economic activity. And so that's part of what we have to deal with is the reality of rational economic activity in a highly regulated world of housing and housing development. And we have, to a large extent, zoned ourselves into this problem. That's what we've done over the years. And so we've regulated ourselves into this problem. And so how do we extract ourselves appropriately? We'll go right here.
So I'm from Springville City, and in our PID policy, we say that for residential development, if you want to do a PID, then you have to dedicate some to deed restrict. And we don't say what portion, we don't say a percentage or anything, it's per development, it's based upon per development. We had a big developer come in, or one of our largest developments, wanted it purely residential, wanted a PID, but refused to do the income restricted. Even though we didn't tell him what, I mean, we would, if he'd said 1, we probably would have been okay with that. Out of
Yeah,
the 500.
but they didn't even want to entertain the concept.
No.
Yeah. Greed is a rational economic action, isn't it? I mean, it's, you know, we're kind of wired to want more. Let's see. There was someone else with a hand up before. Somebody else? Did I miss anyone?
Kind of
Oh,
based off what he was
Yeah.
saying about the tall 3-story homes, the interior ADU is what makes sense for me when it comes to the developer wants to build what they can, what's allowed, but having a component of the interior ADU so
Yeah.
they can rent it and qualify with that portion.
that's a huge economic tool that I don't think we're using very well yet.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, I've had a lot of conversations with a developer who, pretty big builder, but wants to do affordability. He's saying one of the biggest things is the land price, and so you're going to talk about overlay zones. Like, well, if we do an affordable overlay zone, it's like, but then the person selling the land knows that they have this bigger value.
Additional value.
And so a lot of the talk was like, you need to be able to buy it at the low density and then come and upzone it for the smaller lots so that the land value stays down, but then we can provide the cheaper. And so I feel like that's a huge part. Like, developers want to do it, not all of them, but there are those.
Yeah, there are, absolutely. Okay, let me just go through the legislation real quick, and then we'll have more discussion. So, Senate Bill 168, this did two things, really. So modular building, no one's figured it out yet. If you can figure out modular constructions where it's more affordable, but it's actually really high quality and can be delivered on site and all of that, please do. I think it might take like an Elon Musk type to figure this out, because there was a multi-billion-dollar facility in California just went bankrupt, 2 of them actually. They were backed by massive tech money, and they couldn't figure it out. I don't know what it's going to take to change the way we build homes, but we're not there yet. This creates at least a statewide inspection process that we don't have differing things and having to train people across the state in different things, where this just creates some streamlined and uniformity to that. The home ownership promotion zone, HOPZ, or HOPS, is a tool for municipalities to use where they can create essentially a TIF district for housing. And 60% of the units have to be attainable housing based on 80% of the median sales price. And then the municipality gets 60% of the TIF for 15 years. And without having to go back to the taxing entities. That's one of the big fights always. Every time you create a TIF, you got to go, cross swords with the schools and everybody else. And this does it automatically. But it's pretty small, 10-acre parcel or less. And so that's a new tool that I think will be important going forward for communities to have. 465, I'm not going to talk a lot about this. This is pretty wonky. It was really about aligning some of the programs with federal money coming in, and what's the state doing relative to federal money. I could turn it over to Christina. She could talk for hours about this, but I'm not going to let her. And this is where the MIHP, the moderate income housing plans, are carried and kind of refined each year. No major changes to those this session. SB 268, first home investment zones. This is a really complicated tool. I know we've got Ted here from Wasatch Front Regional Council that helped to craft this model. And the best way I've come to describe this is where you have the HTRZs, the kind of the high density downtown kind of transit zone tax districts that can be created. This is sort of for a less dense component of that, a midtown kind of a thing where you have mixed use, but it does something creative which allows the housing that is required to be created, the affordable housing that's required to be created to establish that taxing district, that TIF district, can be located elsewhere in the community, does not have to be in that zone, and can qualify. Again, great policy, because what do we care where it's located? We really shouldn't care where it's located. It just needs to go where it can go, and this allows it to go where it can go. Same thing with the HOPZ. That can be created anywhere that the municipality wants it to. So again, these are tools for municipalities to use. None of this is being shoved down anybody's throat. This is a tool that's out there now for municipality use. This is a pretty complicated tool that we could probably spend an entire hour talking about this particular tool and how it works. But suffice to say, this is another tool in the toolbox for a midtown mixed-use kind of development. Wilf.
So, Steve, have you gotten any kind of a read from the developers and builders about these tools, if they're going to show any inclination to do this?
268, I haven't had any specific discussions. I know developers were involved in the creation of that tool, but again, that's a pretty complicated, large tool. The HOPZ, I think people are optimistic about that one, because it gives the municipality a benefit for creating affordable housing, which doesn't exist generally speaking. So that one I think has, at least on surface, that's a quicker, easier tool. The 268 I think will get used. I think we'll have those. But again, those are going to be larger scale, really complicated financial structures associated with those deals. Yes?
Given our current environment, if we create a zone or a district like this and every resident living in there is a first-time home buyer, they start to age in that time. Obviously that is going to take a while, but you start to become older communities, and then that's where some of those issues come in. Does this have any ability to do mixed range as far as mixed income housing, so that you can pepper that in and more complete communities?
And that's, and I can't remember the ratio in the Fizz. It's, Ted, is it's 50% in some parts, and
I think so I show it's 12% within the zone itself, and in the outside of the zone, 20% of the housing.
Okay.
So mixed income.
Mixed income. And again, that's what our municipalities have asked for, is the ability not to have just a sea of first homes. Again, and you know, the misnomer on this is like, these are just crappy houses. These are you, they're me, they're teachers, these are the people you want to live and be invested in your community. These are not people you're pulling out of the homeless shelter and putting into houses. These are $300,000 plus homes. You got to make a pretty good living to even get into this space. Whoops, I'll go back to this one, HB 13. This goes back to, this is sort of an extension out of the PID world. In the bonding world for infrastructure, there's some kind of voodoo magic that allows for a developer, once they've got the approval and all of their approvals in place and they're going out for financing on their infrastructure, they can apparently, according to this bill and everybody I've talked to, that I still don't understand how, they can utilize the municipality's bonding rating to get an infrastructure bond for their project that the municipality has no obligation to repay, no hit to their bond rating or bonding capacity, and yet the developer gets the benefit of that. It is absolutely mysterious to me how that works, because it doesn't seem to make any sense in any kind of a rational, like, outsider. But if you're a bond counsel, apparently your brain works differently and you can figure out how to do this. So this is a tool that frankly shouldn't really concern anybody, because it's post-approval, and this is just a tool for the developers to go get their infrastructure funding. They would do it by private investment. This is a way for them to bond for it and get a lower rate. As each home in the subdivision that's funded by this sells, it has to pay off that portion of the overall cost. So the homeowners that come in and buy are never going to be held captive by stuff that's outstanding on other parts. The risk is completely with the developer and the bond issuer. It's weird. I don't understand it. I'm not going to try and explain it. there's some magic going on here that I don't really think should happen, but apparently it can. So I'm saying thumbs up to anybody who can use this because it's cheaper money. And again, the question goes back to, does the water get to the end of the road? I can't remember who asked that question. Can we get the water to the end of the road? This does not guarantee that. This does. So this is HB 572. This is the PTIF Investment Liquidity Fund. In our Public Treasures Fund, we have about $30 to $31 billion right now, which is the equivalent of a year's worth of state funding. That fund has ballooned from about $14 million in 2017 to $30 billion, $31 billion now. A big chunk of that was ARPA and federal funds that came in, and then were, the taxing entities used that funding and did their work with it and took their normal tax money and put it into reserves. So we have these massive reserves in our state right now, which again, appropriate reserves are really good economic activity. Excessive reserves can be viewed as harmful economic activity because we're now parking this money outside of our economy, particularly our local economy. Right now, our Public Treasures Investment Fund is invested largely in corporate treasuries, or in U.S. treasuries and corporate bonds. One of those bond issuers is Walmart. We own a bunch of Walmart bonds with our tax money. We bought some Walmart bonds. I bet someone can guess where Walmart is growing the fastest. Not Utah. Nope. Correct. Sam's Clubs. So our tax money, this is a little bit of an issue for me and has been for a couple of years. Our tax money is going to a corporate bond trader in New York who is then investing it with Walmart, and Walmart is taking our cash, flying it across the ocean, and we're building Sam's Clubs somewhere else.
China?
In China. It's not direct, but that's where their growth is. That's where their bond money is going to finance. And they pay that back with operating cash, and they use that to do their financial transactions. There's other examples like this. So our tax money is right now not being used in Utah, our reserves. And to me, this is a really big issue, and I've had arguments with the treasurer, the past two treasurers about this, that I think it's harmful economic activity to take that money out of our state and put it to work in other markets, because even though we would be sacrificing a little bit of yield maybe, we're not chasing that extra 0.5% that we're going to get on the 30 billion. We're going to forego a little bit of yield on that to put money to work in our own state. The benefit of that money that's put to work in our state is pretty evident. We pay taxes on it, pay wages, buy materials, do all those things that generate economic activity in our state. And if you think about, maybe a 10% return to the government through the production of, through the use of this money, that's a 10% return on that money. So you might sacrifice a little bit, but you're gaining a whole lot to the system. It can't necessarily be tied to any one taxing entity, but systemically, it works very, very well. And so that was the backdrop to 572, to creating this liquidity fund, is we have all of this cash, none of which is being used in Utah. Can we use this to solve what I talked about earlier, which is the liquidity problem that our banks are having, our lenders are having, where they are, most of our regional banks, our community banks are operating over, actually all of them I think are operating at over 90% of capacity. No, there's a couple that aren't. So they're at 90% of their lending capacity, which means they're not going to be very aggressive and capable of going out and chasing deals, and a small builder that doesn't have the deep balance sheet is not going to be very attractive to them. Yes?
So with the PTIF depositing at 3.5, that's a negative spread to Fed funds. So you're basically creating a subsidy to these lending institutions.
Correct.
So they can then pass on that benefit to the borrower.
Yep.
Suppose Fed funds gets cut by 2% and now that subsidy is erased. If does this law allow that rate to be reset?
Yeah, it's the Fed funds rate minus 2%.
Okay. Oh.
So we just use 3.5 because that's where it is right now.
Okay.
So it's Fed funds minus 2% to the lending institution, and it's a deposit. So the state is, and maybe I should go on here. Let's see. Well, we'll stay with this. The state is depositing money into these lending institutions as a deposit. So they get a certificate of deposit, and it has certain terms on it, and it's repayable. The lending institution, the entire institution, is now on the hook for that deposit. But in order for the lending institution to get that deposit, they have to bring to the treasurer's office a qualified project. And that qualified project starts, frankly, with you and a developer sitting down and saying, can we do a qualified project in our community? And that qualified project requires really a couple of things. One, the homes that are created have to be owner-occupied, deed restricted, 60% of the homes. Minimum of 5-year deed restriction for owner occupancy. Does not necessarily have to be first-time home buyers and is not income restricted, but they have to be owner-occupied. The second piece is they have to sell for a fixed price, and that price will be determined over the next 30 days. Right now, we're tagging on to the $450,000 level that was established last year. That is going to change over the next 30 days in discussions with Utah Housing Corp. So Utah Housing Corp board has the authority to reset those amounts every year. We're targeting $350,000 for the state as the price that those things need to sell for. And what that does, and I think we talked about, over there, well, you said we're looking at $300 a square foot for construction. You can get it down to 200, 250 maybe, but you're talking about 1,000 square foot home. That's what we're talking about now. And maybe it doesn't have a garage. And I guarantee that people that live in those homes are going to be okay. This is not going to kill anybody. We've had these homes in our communities for years and years and years and years. This just provides that opportunity for them. Yes?
How do you
Tyson.
So, cards on the table, I'm not a planner, I'm an engineer. Right? How do you
Darn you.
I know. I'm the one you guys yell at all the time because I'm messing up the vision. But how do you get the communities that you're trying to put these, and these are awesome projects
Yeah.
that we need in the community, but I've had several that have gotten canceled because they don't pencil, whatever, and the communities won't accept them.
Yeah.
The neighbors come out and protest it. I mean, you guys have all encountered the NIMBYs, I'm sure.
Yep.
How do we get past that?
The discussion that we've had, and again, this is an incentive project. So the first step to this is the developer and the local entity, whatever the zoning authority is, have to come to an agreement. It doesn't have to be a development agreement. It can be an agreement that just takes into account what's already in place. It can be a letter agreement. It does not have to be, and this is key, it does not have to be a legislative action. It can be an administrative act to create that agreement. It could be either, but they have to have an agreement. And the feedback we got from the municipalities is we want ownership. We don't want rentals.
Right.
And so that's the key to enticing them to want to do this, is they can guarantee that they're going to get ownership, and they can make a longer than 5-year deed restriction. It's whatever they want. It's a minimum of 5 years. It doesn't have to be 5 years. There are some communities, like in southern Utah, I would recommend they do 50-year deed restrictions. Otherwise, those are all going to turn into rentals, unless they have another tool to prevent rentals. But you want those to stay in the community as ownership opportunities. And the communities can also say to the developer, hey, we have employees. Can we have 20% of these units as a first right for our employees? Fantastic. That's wonderful. That's the benefit. That's the incentive for communities. And the unspoken truth is, if we can't do this voluntarily, we have a problem. We are going to have to bring the state hammer down. No one wants to do that because it doesn't work very well. And we have to find a better way. We talked about, hammers versus rewards, and that discussion has to go forward, because there will be some who are just going to say, I don't care what you say, I don't care what you do. I'm never going to do this. You have some city councils and mayors that were elected on that platform. This is my platform. Never, never, none, none, never, never. At some point, they're going to have to be brought. It's either going to be at the point of bayonet or voluntarily to the conclusion that they have to participate. We all have to participate in this program. There is no option. We can't not do that. Yes, please.
How big does the qualifying project have to be?
No size restriction.
So it can be 5 homes.
5 homes, 100 homes, 1,000 homes, whatever. And it can be phased. You can have phase 1 that qualifies, phase 2 doesn't. But the money that's lent on phase 1 just has to fit in that box. Yes?
So I think the point was made earlier, but I think a big concern with this is you're saying the target is $350,000 for a starter home. Well, if that's a 2,500 or 3,000 square foot home, that's great. But how much is the square footage cost of that home? We should be looking at what everything else is costing. What is it? I don't know what the current 200 something per square foot. We should be looking at the exact same per square foot cost that any other house would, because these are going to be a lot higher per square foot than your regular home.
And at some level, we have to let the market determine that. We fix a price, and we're doing, you have to build 60% of those as a developer. The other 40% is whatever you and the community agree to. So you can make more money on that other 40%, but on that 60%, you're going to have to, as a developer, and we met with one yesterday that was uncomfortable. And I'm like, great. You should be uncomfortable. We want you to be uncomfortable coming into the middle of this. We want you to come into the middle and have to contribute some of your profit, because we're not going to let you build the 4-story, $700,000 home. You're going to have to figure out how much money you can make building a $350,000 home, and it may be 900 square feet with a carport. That may just be the reality, and that's okay.
I guess another concern I know that we've had as a city is solutions like this. It seems like a great one-shot hit, right? Like you get affordable housing for 20 people that get into it, but then it's not long-term. Mm-hmm. Is there any thought to that? How to make it so it continues, so it's not like you just continue to have to do these projects over and over to get strong affordability?
Yeah, again, that's within the city's purview, because your agreement with the developer is going to be whatever you want it to be. So if you're concerned, and we were just talking about this with Weber County, maybe 20% of those are set aside with an additional income restriction. Fine, do it. Make it work for your community. But this bill is 4 pages long. It could have been 400 pages long if we got into trying to legislate all of those things. I would much rather have the cities and the development community figure out what works than have the state coming in and saying, we're going to make you do A, B, and C. We really want to just create broad outlines and then allow, again, the market, as it is, to determine what works in each area and each municipality as they meet with you and say, okay, well, we can only build 900 square foot homes and we need lots that are 4,000 square feet in order to make this work. Now the community has to say, okay, well, let's do, out of these 100 things, we'll do 60 that are 4,000 square foot lots. And the other 40 can be quarter acre, half acre. They can be whatever they want. But in order to make them pencil, they have to be at this price. That's the challenge. So this is a carrot approach to a large degree for everybody to come to the table and say, hey, development community, you got to sacrifice a little bit. We're not going to let you build whatever you want. Our communities want something different. We're giving that to them. But they're also going to have to come to the table and say, you know what, yeah, we may have to do a little more density and a little smaller lots to allow this to pencil. The financial institutions would love to charge more than a 3.5% spread. They can't. But they can get 100% of that loan money deposited into their institution, which gives them flexibility in other ways.
I want to be mindful of your time. We are coming up on 1:30, which is when the event.
Everybody's got to leave, yeah.
I don't know if there's
So,
a question or two.
yeah, and we'll send this to
I'll pull this
Chris,
off and-
okay, and he'll send this out, and I don't know if just put my number out, my cell phone number and my email. It's swaldrip@utah.gov, SWALDRIP. My phone number is 801-389-9329. I love talking to you guys. And like, seriously, Emily, do I like talking to people that know what they're talking about?
Yes.
Emily knows what she's talking about, and so I love talking to Emily because she's smart. And my world gets a lot easier if I deal with smart people and people that know the realities of situation in their city. What do we need to do to tweak this over the next year? Is this going to work? What specific things are not going to work about it in certain communities? Do we need to adjust? This is a $300 million fund right now, a $300 million account. We have $30 billion. We can grow this as needed. And again, I think the argument is very, very simple, that $300 million pumped into Utah is going to produce at least a 10% return to the state. Taxing entities, cities, other communities, one time. And then ongoing, it's going to continue to produce. And let's say we end up building 10,000 starter homes. You've now created $4 billion of value to the people who live in the state of Utah. That's not a small number. And we're only talking about 10,000 homes. We need 35,000 of them. So we're talking billions of dollars into our collective middle class pockets. That is the economic outcome we have to strive toward. And it will take sacrifice, but that's where you guys come in. You are the whisperers behind the curtain, right? You're the ones who get to say, hey, we really need to consider this. And put that level of attention to the bigger picture outside of, it goes back to the original point, right? We're talking about big structures, big plans, big things. We want a middle class. We want a substantial middle class. We want a wealthy middle class. That is what makes our country go. In order to get that, we have to implement policies that will create that. And that's where you guys come in. I really appreciate talking to you. I love the feedback I've gotten today and the questions. And again, I'm happy to come and meet with you at your city, your county. I've done it with Weber, as Charlie knows. I've done it with some other communities. Happy to come out and just talk through process with you, get on a Zoom, whatever you need. That's my job. That's my world. And thank you very much.